that lonesome road, hang down your head and cry. The best of friends must part sometime. Oh, tell me why, oh, why. Go down that lonesome road and travel slow or fast. Your heavy load will fade away, and you'll be home at last.
Joan Baker was born February 12, 1936 in Groesbeck, Texas. He was a strapping 6 foot 2 inch tall and carried himself like a lumbering bear. He rocketed to fame as true-life Tennessee Sheriff, Buford Pusser, and the blockbuster sleeper Walking Tall in 1973. A student of the Actors Studio in New York, Baker's first Western was an excellent hour-long black-and-white episode of Gunsmoke, Prime of Life, directed by Robert Totten in 1966. He and Jonathan Goldsmith were the hot-headed sons of ex-lawman Douglas Kennedy, a friend of Dillon. When Goldsmith kills someone, he's thrown in jail. This was the last hour-long Gunsmoke episode before going to color for the 1966-67 season. Guest spots on Westerns, Iron Horse, and Bonanza helped give Baker work and showcased his powerful presence. I remember seeing him on the pilot episode of Lancer, The High Riders, in 1968. Joe Don is Day Pardee, the leader of a ruthless gang hired to destroy the sprawling ranch of Murdoch Lancer. Murdoch's estranged sons are asked to help save the ranch. One of the sons, embittered fast gun Johnny Madrid, played by James Stacy, knows Pardee. Their scenes together literally jumped off the screen. Who were these guys? Of course, the episode ends in a shootout between the two. Joe Don Baker literally exploded on the screen. I felt like I was watching a new favorite. I was. So were the producers. Baker was asked back as guest star 2 more times as different characters. Cinema lover and writer-director extraordinaire Quentin Tarantino must have been watching this first episode too, because he paid tribute to the Lancer pilot by recreating it in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood with Leonardo DiCaprio heavily mustached as Joe Don Baker. Joe Don made his feature film debut as one of the prisoners in 1967's Cool Hand Luke, with Paul Newman as Luke. It was an all-star cast of male actors, but Baker was unbilled. On the Big Valley, Joe Don guest starred as Tom Lightfoot, a college-educated but very volatile Modoc Indian. Lightfoot is falsely accused of murder and goes on trial defended by Jared Barkley, who's fighting for the civil rights of a marginalized people. Once again, Joe Don Baker creates a compelling character on series television that dominates the episode. Joe Don was tapped to appear in the second sequel to The Magnificent Seven in 1969, titled Guns of the Magnificent Seven. It was shot in Almeria, Spain, spaghetti western territory. The Seven are hired to rescue a revolutionary from a Mexican dictator. Replacing Yul Brynner as Chris was recent Oscar winner George Kennedy, and Joe Don Baker as Fast Gun Slater. In 1971, in the Hostage, a 4th season episode of The High Chaparral, Joe Don was a bank robber channeling bad boy behavior as he roughs up young Rudy Ramos and tries to make his way with Victoria Cannon. That same year, 1971, in The Wild Rover starring William Holden and Ryan O'Neal as inept bank robbers on the run, Joe Don and Tom Skerritt are the sons of Carl Malden, who joined the posse to track down the two former employees of their father. Sam Peckinpah's Junior Bonner was a surprise for audiences. They were expecting violent action from the director of The Wild Bunch and Straw Dogs. Instead, they got a charming, lyrical family drama set against the world of championship rodeo and the passing of an era, that of the cowboy. Shot in Prescott, Arizona, Junior Bonner starred Steve McQueen as a lonesome over-the-hill cowboy and a rodeo pro whose dreams never seemed to come true. It's one of McQueen's best performances. Joe Don is his younger brother Curly, a real estate developer tearing up the land with dreams of becoming a millionaire. Baker, with his authentic Texas drawl, has a great line to McQueen's Jr. "I'm working on my first million. You're still working on 8 seconds." The year after Junior Bonner, 1973, proved to be a banner one for Baker. He starred in 3 solid crime movies: Walking Tall, Charlie Varick, and The Outfit. One was Joe Don's breakout role. Of course, I'm talking about the part of Sheriff Buford Pusser in Walking Tall. It was directed by Phil Carlson. In the film, Joe Don portrayed a true-life Tennessee lawman who battled the Dixie Mafia in the late 1960s. Joe Don not only looked the part, he inhabited the role and brought the club-wielding lawman to life. The ad campaign was brilliant. Walk softly and carry a big stick, with the trailer announcer asking, "When was the last time you stood up and applauded a movie?" Yes, it was a visceral experience and surprised everyone with its phenomenal success. On a budget of $500,000, Walking Tall grossed $40 million, 80 times its budget. Joe Don worked again with the director in Framed, 1975. It was another story with a revenge-seeking protagonist, a Carlson specialty. It was the director's final film before retiring. Cast as the lead in 1977's The Shadow of Chikira, of Civil War supernatural western, one of Earl Smith's low-budget exploitation offerings, Joe Don is a former Confederate captain hunting for diamonds on sacred Indian ground. Released multiple times with multiple titles, The Curse of the Demon Mountain, Wishbone and Cutter, a witchcraft western. The Shadow of Chikira is remembered, if at all, as the movie that featured live horses going over a cliff to their death. On the small screen, Baker starred as police detective Earl Eyeshide in To Kill a Cop in 1978. Well-reviewed and well-watched, the movie spun off into the short-lived series Eyeshide. In lead roles in movies like Final Justice and Mitchell, Baker wasn't finding much success, so he did an about-face and became an in-demand character actor, displaying his versatility as a comic foil for Chevy Chase in Fletch and his Babe Ruth-inspired legend in The Natural. Baker even landed roles as different characters in 2 different James Bond films with 2 different actors as 007. In Mud, an amazing Southern coming-of-age tale with violent undertones, Joe Don is effectively terrifying as King, who is leading an armed brigade to keep Matthew McConaughey from his daughter Reese Witherspoon. It was one of the best films of 2012 and is the last feature film released featuring Joe Don Baker. He died of lung cancer in Mission Hills, California, May 7th, 2025, at the age of 89. But wait, there may still be another movie where Joe Don captures the screen. He's listed as Shotgun Tucker in the unreleased western Cowboys from Hell. Brigitte Bardot was born Brigitte Anne Marie Bardot in Paris on September 28, 1934. She radiated animal magnetism on screen and fought for animal welfare off-screen. Trained as a ballet dancer, she drifted into modeling as a teenager, and that camera-ready mix of pouty innocence and audacity quickly turned into film offers. She met a young writer, the aspiring director Roger Vadim, while still a teen. He became both her mentor and, in 1952, her first husband. As a creative partnership, Vadim didn't just direct Bardot. He helped package her. He fashioned an image for her of a free-spirited, voluptuous sexual creature in their first film together, And God Created Woman, in 1956. It scandalized censors, but was an immediate smash and made her a defining symbol of post-war sexual liberation. In all, Bardot made 5 films with Vadim as director, culminating in Don Juan, or If Don Juan Were a Woman, in 1973, the year she retired. She became so famous that only her initials, BB, were needed as identification. She lit up the screen and box office working with high-profile directors like Jean-Luc Godard and Henri-Georges Clouzot. She was internationally famous and appeared as herself with James Stewart in the comedy Dear Brigitte in 1965, getting her first American kiss not from Stewart, but from his young Bardot-obsessed son, Bill Mumy. Surprisingly, Westerns became a late career showcase for her international stardom. Louis Malle's Viva Maria in 1965 is a rambunctious revolutionary romp starring Bardot and fellow bombshell Jean Moreau. BB joins the circus, accidentally does a striptease, and becomes a sensation. Shot in Mexico, Viva Maria was a fun spaghetti Western parody and a bona fide hit. BB was even nominated for a BAFTA Film Award as Best Foreign Actress for the film. BB saddled up again with the towering cowboy hero James Bond. Well, it was Sean Connery in a role trying out a new genre. He's Shalico, a lone tracker who comes across an abandoned group of European aristocrats who were hunting in the wilds of 1880s New Mexico on Apache land. Not a good idea. Connery is good and got on well with Bardot. With her fabulous blonde locks blowing in the wind, she is beautiful in this straightforward Western based on a Louis L'Amour novel and directed by Edward Dimitri. BB is teamed with Claudia Cardinale for a comedy buddy Western called The Legend of Frenchy King. Bardot is Frenchy, and Cardinale, coming off the worldwide success of Once Upon a Time in the West, is her sister. As a reviewer on IMDb says, it's a Western babe fest with BB and CC. It's silly, but the two stars became good friends. The film is lots of fun, and it was another big success. At the age of 39, the world's most famous sex symbol since Marilyn Monroe retired. She was disillusioned with fame and wanted her privacy. She redirected her celebrity by campaigning against multiple forms of animal cruelty. On the personal side, she was married 4 times and spoke openly over the years about depression and her suicide attempts. Brigitte Bardot died at her home in Saint-Tropez on December 28, 2025. She was 95 years old. Jack Fillmore Betts, better known to Western fans internationally as Hunt Powers, was one of those hard-working American actors who quietly racked up more than 100 credits on stage, film, and television over 6 decades, and somehow ended up a cult hero of spaghetti westerns. Born in Jersey City, New Jersey on April 11, 1929, he moved with his family to Miami at the age of 10. He studied theater at the University of Miami, then headed to New York, where a chance audition at the Actors Studio earned him a scholarship. In 1959, he was in front of the camera and top billed in The Bloody Brood, a low-budget exploitation film about beatniks, shot in Canada that boasted Peter Falk as a creepy psycho. His career took a sharp turn in the mid-'60s when Italian producers came calling. The success of Sergio Leone's Dollars trilogy had triggered an explosion of westerns in Italy and Spain. Most of them starred an American film actor known for westerns as the lead and marquee name. Actors like Rod Cameron and Guy Madison made the journey. Betts went to Italy, took the screen name Hunt Powers, and suddenly found himself on a horse in the Almeria Desert playing a government gunman in Sugar Colt in 1966. Sugar Colt was his spaghetti western debut and remains one of his best. Filmed in southern Spain, it has a light, almost secret agent's tone and was praised years later as a little masterpiece. After Sugar Colt, he went on to star in roughly 15 spaghetti westerns between 1966 and the early 70s, usually billed as Hunt Powers. He became a regular leading man for films like Dead Men Don't Make Shadows, A Barrel Full of Dollars, and made films as both Django and as Sartana, icons of the genre in films that flooded the market at the time. Betts himself joked that during this period Clint Eastwood was in the hotel next door. The difference was that Eastwood's films were distributed all over the world while Hunt's played everywhere except Canada and the United States. Within the genre, though, the Hunt Powers pictures did good business. He exuded a mix of American polish and slightly offbeat charm. Back in the States, as Jack Betts, he found a busy television career, including Western guest roles on Bonanza and Gunsmoke, and other non-Western series before becoming a daytime soap regular on General Hospital, The Young and the Restless, All My Children, Guiding Light, and One Life to Live. Later generations probably first spotted him on primetime hits like Friends, Seinfeld, Frasier, Power Rangers Lost Galaxy, and Everybody Loves Raymond. Perhaps his most memorable post-spaghetti western movie role was that of Boris Karloff in the small but well-reviewed Gods and Monsters, starring Ian McKellen as James Whale, the director of the original Frankenstein and The Bride of Frankenstein. Off-screen, Betts kept his private life largely to himself. He never married, but he had a decades-long friendship with fellow actor Doris Roberts and lived in a downstairs apartment in her Hollywood Hills home. He even appeared on her series Everybody Loves Raymond. Jack Betts, a.k.a. Hunt Powers, died peacefully in his sleep at his home in Los Altos, California, on June 19, 2025, at the age of 96. Clyde Randall Randy Boone was born January 17, 1942, in Fayetteville, North Carolina. He was a math major who walked away from college with a guitar and a hitchhiker's thumb and somehow rode that combination all the way to Shiloh Ranch and the Cimarron Strip. In 1962, after hitchhiking to Universal City with that guitar on his back, he was discovered by director Peter Tewksbury and cast as Vern Hodges, the folk-singing college kid on NBC's short-lived but fondly remembered It's a Man's World. That role put his music on camera and, more importantly, put him under contract to Universal. He was told he looked like someone born to be in westerns and that if he could ride, they'd be steady work. So he bought a horse named Clyde and learned the hard way in and around Hollywood. When It's a Man's World was canceled, Universal absorbed both Randy and Clyde into the Virginian. He agreed to let the studio use his horse for free if they would board him, a deal the producers happily accepted. Randy joined the Virginian in Season 2, first appearing in the 90-minute episode First to Thine Own Self in 1964. There he played Randy Benton, a guitar-toting drifter who protects a young girl after her father's murder and winds up accused of the crime himself. He's cleared of chorus and decides to stay on at Shiloh Ranch as a hand. From 1964 to 1966, he appeared in about 46 episodes, usually with his guitar close by, sharing scenes with James Drury, Doug McClure, Roberta Shore, Clu Gulager, and Lee J. Cobb. The show filmed largely on the Universal backlot. Several episodes made a point of showcasing Randy's music. Universal and Decca moved quickly to capture that popularity on vinyl. In 1965, Decca released Presenting Randy Boone and Roberta Shore, the singing stars of The Virginian. When his run on the Virginian ended, Randy wasn't done with 90-minute westerns. In 1967, he was cast as Francis Wilde, a young frontier scout riding for Stuart Whitman's Marshal Jim Crown on Cimarron Strip. Across the decade, Boone guest starred in many of the era's best-known shows: The Twilight Zone, Wagon Train, Bonanza, Combat, Kung Fu, Gunsmoke, Emergency, and others. In 1966, he received the Bronze Wrangler from the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum for his work on the Virginian episode The Horse Fighter. By the late 1980s, Boone quietly stepped away from screen acting and went to work in construction, but he never stopped playing music. Randy Boone died peaceably at home on August 28, 2025. He was 83 years old. Claudia Cardinale was born Claude Josephine Rose Cardinale August 15, 1938, near Tunis to Sicilian parents. Once Upon a Time in the West made her the beating heart of one of the most influential westerns ever made. Her sultry widow, Jill McBain, has since been celebrated as one of the genre's great heroines. As a teenager, she was pushed into entering A Most Beautiful Italian Girl in Tunisia, a contest in 1957 that she won. The prize was a trip to the Venice Film Festival, where producer Franco Cristaldi quickly signed her and steered her into Italian films. After a small part in Goa and in the caper film Big Deal on Madonna Street in 1958, Cardinale began to attract attention. In fact, in 1963, she was in 3 films that made her an international star. She was in Luchino Visconti's 3-hour epic The Leopard as an earthy, ambitious Angelica opposite Burt Lancaster and Alain Delon, playing the idealized dream woman for harried movie director Marcello Mastroianni in Fellini's 8½, and as the princess in The Pink Panther, the first of her English-language films. Her entire performance was dubbed. And the first of Blake Edwards' films with Peter Sellers about bumbling Inspector Clouseau. Those back-to-back performances cemented her as a major international star, and she signed with John Wayne and Rita Hayworth in what had begun as a Frank Capra movie, Circus World, in 1964. It was finished by director Henry Hathaway. Duke, owner of a circus continually facing disaster, interacts well with Rita. Even better are the scenes with Rita and Claudia, cast as an aerialist and Rita's daughter. She's being romanced by John Smith. Both ladies are gorgeous and charismatic. Their scenes together are a delight. Other English-language films followed: Blindfold, The Lost Command, Don't Make Waves, and her first Western, a classic, The Professionals, written and directed by Richard Brooks in 1966. In The Professionals, Claudia was cast as the supposedly kidnapped Mexican wife of arrogant Texas tycoon Ralph Bellamy. 4 aging mercenaries, the Professionals, were played by Burt Lancaster, Lee Marvin, Robert Ryan, and Woody Strode, each a specialist. Jack Palance was revolutionary bandit Raza. When the 4 ride into Mexico to rescue Claudia, they discover she is with Raza by choice. The Professionals is one of the finest westerns ever made. Everything works, from the individual characterizations of each performer to the spectacular Oscar-nominated cinematography by the genius Conrad Hall, plus a stunning south-of-the-border-influenced score by Maurice Jarre and a very good script, both getting Oscar nods. Richard Brooks was also nominated as Best Director. Claudia repeatedly called The Professionals her finest American picture and spoke of Brooks giving her a serious role in a Western, not just beautiful window dressing. But it was Sergio Leone's masterpiece, Once Upon a Time in the West in 1968, that gave Claudia Cardinale her signature Western role. Jill McBain, a New Orleans prostitute who arrives in a frontier town to join her new husband, only to find him and his children slaughtered by the ruthless Frank, played by Henry Fonda. She becomes the embattled owner of the Sweetwater Ranch, caught between a mysterious harmonica-playing gunfighter, Charles Bronson, a notorious outlaw, Cheyenne, Jason Robards, and Fonda's assassin. Claudia's role in Once Upon a Time in the West is widely cited as one of the best-written female characters in Western cinema. Leone built the film around Jill as the emotional center. In fact, she gets top billing. Modern critics routinely rank the character among the top Western heroines, and Cardinale's performance is often singled out as a highlight of the film. The film mixed Italian and American sensibilities and locations. Interiors were done in Rome, the town and Sweetwater exterior sequences were shot in Spain, and Claudia's journey was framed against the buttes of Monument Valley in Arizona and Utah. Classic John Ford country. It was a fitting tribute from Leone. Once Upon a Time in the West is a masterful epic. Everything works. Claudia spoke warmly about Leone, calling him an innovator in the way he framed eyes, hands, and small details, and recalling how he had Morricone's theme for Jill played on the set to help her become the character. She also remembered being the only woman on a very male set, both in the story and in reality. After those more serious westerns, Claudia returned to the genre in a lighter key with The Legend of Frenchy King. The film is a French-Italian spaghetti western comedy shot in Spain near locations familiar from Leone's films. Claudia was joined by Brigitte Bardot, bringing two of Europe's most popular leading ladies together. It's all pretty silly, with Michael J. Pollard as an inept sheriff, plenty of tongue-in-cheek action, and a famous cat fight that leans into the audience's enjoyment of seeing Bardot and Claudia Cardinale together. They became good friends during the filming. While her overall career stretches from European art cinema to political dramas and later character roles, Western fans remember her for the handful of films where she brought a distinctly European sensibility and emotional depth to the genre. Claudia's private life was complicated, and for many years was deliberately vague to protect her image. At 19, she was raped by an older man and became pregnant. For years, her son Patrick was publicly presented as her younger brother. He was later adopted by her first husband and mentor, Franco Cristaldi. Claudia Cardinale died September 23, 2025, in France, aged 87. Born Marilyn Joan Watts and raised in Santa Monica, California, beautiful actress Mara Corday's friendship with Clint Eastwood goes back, way back, to their days as contract players at Universal International in the early 1950s. Mara was starring in Tarantula with John Agar and Leo G. Carroll. Clint had a tiny part as a jet pilot. The two were part of the last group of young stars to be groomed by the studio system, nurturing young talent. At 17, Mara worked as a showgirl with the Earl Carroll Revue and landed non-speaking bit parts in several movies, including the Republic Western Toughest Man in Arizona in 1952, and as an unbilled harem girl with Tony Curtis as the son of Ali Baba. Mara was moved up to sizable roles in several episodes of The Adventures of Kit Carson starring Bill Williams and Don Diamond, earning a SAG card in the process, which enabled her to sign with UI. More small parts followed. The gorgeous Mara was yet another harem girl in Yankee Pasha. Having worked for multiple photographers as a model, Mara appeared on the cover of various men's magazines. Under contract, her roles were getting bigger, and she was cast in the color Audie Murphy Western Drums Across the River in 1954. Mara as a devious and voluptuous saloon hostess involved with sinister Lyle Betker. It was one of Murphy's better films, boasting a top cast including three-time Academy Award winner Walter Brennan. Around this time, she met future husband Richard Long, also a UI contract player. They both appeared in Playgirl, the studio's 1954 drama starring Shelley Winters and Barry Sullivan. However, Long was dating actress Susan Ball and married her following Ball's leg amputation from cancer. Tragically, Ball died a year later. 2 years after his wife's death, Long married Mara in January 1957. They had 3 children. It was a tumultuous relationship, but they remained married. Long, always plagued by heart problems, died in 1974 at the age of 47. More features at UI followed for Mara. When Frances joined the Wax, she was there. In Dawn at Sirocco, she was Letty Diamond with Rory Calhoun as a dying gunfighter. She took a character part as Moccasin Mary in King Vidor's color Kirk Douglas Western classic, Man Without a Star. Soon, Mara was being bumped up to leading lady in second billing in The Man from Bitter Ridge. She's part of a love triangle coveted by Special Investigator Lex Barker and Sheepman Stephen McNally. Other solid UI color westerns with Mara are A Day of Fury, starring Dale Robertson top billed, but a bad guy, with Jock Mahoney and Mara, a former saloon girl, now respectable, and the woman they both desire. Raw Edge with Rory Calhoun as a former Texas Ranger out for revenge with the man who killed his brother, John Gavin. Mara, the half-white widow, also wants revenge. Another Western pushing the censorship limits is The Quiet Gun. Sheriff Forrest Tucker wants to protect his friend from a murder charge. His friend is Jim Davis, married but living with his half-breed lover, Mara. His wife is out of town. The citizens are in an uproar. Deaths and lynchings occur in this terrific Western directed by William F. Claxton. He would later direct 57 episodes of Bonanza and multiple episodes of The Little House on the Prairie. The Quiet Gun is among his best work. Also in the cast are Lee Van Cleef and Hank Worden. A trio of 1950s sci-fi favorites helped give Mara a devoted following that seems to grow with each passing year. The films are Tarantula, that features a kindly scientist experimenting with hormones that inadvertently cause a spider to grow to giant size and go on a rampage. The Giant Claw is a giant buzzard from outer space wreaking havoc, destruction, and death. It's hilariously ridiculous. And then there's The Black Scorpion that features, of course, giant scorpions unleashed by a volcano that threatened Mexico City. In each of these, Mara is the beautiful assistant paired with John Agar, Richard Denning, and Jeff Morrow, respectively. Mara's contract with UI came to an end when MCA purchased Universal Studios. All through the golden era of TV westerns, Mara worked steadily, appearing on The Restless Gun with John Payne, working again with Dale Robertson on his series The Tales of Wells Fargo, and Steve McQueen on Wanted Dead or Alive. One of her best was on one of the best holiday episodes of a TV Western. It was a 1960 episode of Laramie called A Sound of Bells. Set on Christmas Eve, the Sherman Waste Station is under attack by the Sioux. The guest cast of assorted travelers, each with their own agenda, are played by Mara, Ben Johnson, Dick Foran, Robert J. Wilkie, Rachel Ames, young actor Kim Hector as a traumatized boy, and the versatile character actor Ross Martin as a Mexican bandit hunted by the Sioux. When her old friend from her days at Universal International heard she needed work, he put her in 4 of his movies. That friend was Clint Eastwood, and the films were The Gauntless, Sudden Impact, Pink Cadillac, and The Rookie. She played supporting parts in his films just as he had many years before in her film Tarantula. In Sudden Impact, Mara is being held at gunpoint by a robber when Clint utters his classic line, "Go ahead, make my day." Mara Corday died at her home in Santa Clarita, California, February 9th, 2025. She was 95 years old. Pat Crowley had that kind of bright, quick-responding screen presence that made her a natural for the busiest years of television. She made multiple appearances on Maverick and was even one of the beauties that Little Joe fell for in a Bonanza episode. She was born September 17, 1933 in Oliphant, Pennsylvania, and as a teenager headed to New York, where she attended New York's High School of Performing Arts and began working early as a model. Her older sister Ann was a singing Broadway star in such hits as Oklahoma, Carousel, and Paint Your Wagon. Pat began her film career in the early 1950s and worked with, among others, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis in Money from Home, the 1954 3D racetrack slapstick comedy. Pat played a veterinarian and won a Golden Globe as Actress New Star of the Year for her work with the team. She was the girlfriend of Tony Curtis in the boxing film The Square Jungle and reunited with Martin and Lewis for their final movie before the duo broke up. Ironically, it was titled Hollywood or Bust. Audie Murphy starred in Walk the Proud Land, a feature based on the life of Indian agent John Clum, who attempted to bring peace to the mistreated Apaches in 1874. Pat was his bride who couldn't grasp why Clum was risking his life for the savages. Was it because he had hidden feelings for an Indian widow played by Anne Bancroft? Jay Silverheels, as cast as Geronimo in Walk the Proud Land, beautifully shot in Arizona, is another one of Murphy's top films. For TV Western fans, Crowley's resume is a ride through the genre's golden age. She guest starred on major series including Maverick, Cheyenne, Bronco, Gunsmoke, and Tales of Wells Fargo, opposite a guest star whose own star was rising Robert Vaughn. Some of her best Western parts came on television in guest star roles like Incident of the Mountain Man on Rawhide. The Drovers stopped the lynching of a mountain man, Robert Middleton. Pat plays his daughter. Middleton was supposed to have killed Robert Wilkie's son. Clint Eastwood takes Middleton and his daughter to a town for a proper trial. It's a tense episode with Middleton taking acting honors. As an aspiring actress on Bonanza, Pat gets romanced by Little Joe. What's a smitten Little Joe to do when he's got a crush on Pat, who has her sights set on a career? As usual, Pa has words of wisdom. Pat even gets an opportunity to sing. She does it well. She loves Little Joe, but of course, a career comes first. Her most widely recognized role came in 1965 with a small-screen version of the hit Doris Day movie, Please Don't Eat the Daisies. It was a charming color comedy with Pat playing a newspaper columnist's mother who didn't fit the traditional sitcom perfect homemaker mold. Alongside acting, she had a strong musical streak. She could both sing and dance, making a reunion with her old co-star Dean Martin on The Dean Martin Show an easy task. Pat worked in every genre and appeared in such diverse series as The Fugitive and The Man from U.N.C.L.E., where she was reunited with Robert Vaughn in a two-part episode that was edited together and released as a movie called To Catch a Spy. She appeared in the hit sitcom Friends and procedurals like The Closer and Cold Case. Her last on-screen credit was in Montreve in 2012 about romance and politics at a prep school. Pat Crowley's personal life included two very prominent marriages. First, she was married to powerful entertainment attorney Ed Hookstratton, whose clients included Johnny Carson and Elvis Presley. Later, in 1986, she married Andy Friendly, a television producer executive. Pat Crowley died in Los Angeles, California on September 14, 2025, of natural causes, just 2 days before her 92nd birthday. Ed Faulkner, born Feldon Edward Faulkner II on Leap Day, February 29, 1932, in Lexington, Kentucky, looked like he'd been built for the Western Assembly Line. He was 6 foot 3 inches tall, lean, athletic, and comfortable on a horse. He grew up in Kentucky and never planned to be an actor. Ed earned a business degree at the University of Kentucky and performed often on stage in the university's theater. Then served as a U.S. Air Force jet fighter pilot. A family crisis, his father's death and the collapse of the family business, helped push him toward the one thing he'd always been able to do: walk into a room and perform. In spring 1958, he moved with his wife to California and tried to make the leap for real. Ed was discovered by director Andrew V. McLaughlin, son of Oscar-winning actor Victor. Director McLaughlin, then a powerhouse staff director in TV westerns, introduced Faulkner to Richard Boone, who was known for giving unknowns a shot if they had the goods. Boone and McLaughlin saw the same things casting services often crave: size, discipline, horsemanship, and a steady presence. McLaughlin cast Ed in an episode of Have Gun Will Travel. Airing on CBS October 4, 1958, the episode was The Hanging of Roy Carter. It was a bit part for Ed, but he must have impressed both McLaughlin and star Boone, because he was back again a mere 3 weeks later in The Road to Wickenburg, this time cast as one of a trio of brothers that are after Paladin and actress Christine White. The trio are Harry Carey Jr., Don Red Barry, and Ed. Shot in Lone Pine, the cast also includes Rayford Barnes and Michael Forrest. Just a few months after using Faulkner in 2 Have Gun Will Travel episodes, McLaughlin cast Ed in his first Gunsmoke. Ed ended up appearing 6 times on Gunsmoke, 7 times on Rawhide, and 13 on Have Gun Will Travel. Remarkable runs for a guest star actor appearing as a different character each time. McLaughlin's credits include directing 116 episodes of Have Gun and 95 episodes of Gunsmoke. The Western boom did the rest. Faulkner became one of those trusted faces producers could drop into a story at any point. Deputy, cavalryman, ranch hand, hired gun, and the audience would believe him instantly. McLaughlin later invited Ed into John Wayne's world, directing him in 5 Wayne films: McClintock in 1963, Hellfighters and the Green Berets in 1968, The Undefeated in 1969, and Chisholm in 1970. What Wayne and McLaughlin found in Ed wasn't just actor and star, it became a genuine friendship, cemented between takes over hundreds of chess games, with Faulkner joking that he occasionally let Duke win. Outside McLaughlin, Faulkner also worked under top-tier filmmakers like Howard Hawks, but again with Wayne in 1970 on Hawks's Rio Lobo. I think his best role in a John Wayne film came in his turn as young Ben Sage in McClintock. Classic Western comedy with a superb cast. McClintock is a fan favorite because it's a pure slice of the Wayne Stock Company team working well together. Ed's fight with Patrick Wayne over Duke's daughter in the film, Stephanie Powers, is a highlight of this audience-friendly favorite. Ed's knack for comedy helped him broaden his filmography with much more than westerns. He worked with Elvis twice, first in GI Blues and then with a larger role in Tickle Me. Other comedies include The Ballad of Josie, also directed by McLaughlin, The Shakiest Gun in the West with Don Knotts, The Barefoot Executive, and Now You See Him, Now You Don't for Disney, and Something Big, another by McLaughlin, this one a comedy western with Dean Martin and Brian Keith. Ed Faulkner has such a recognizable face, and he seemed to be on everything. On TV, he appeared on The Virginian in 11 episodes. On The Outcast, Gilligan's Island, Laredo, The Invaders, Iron Horse, 3 times on Bonanza, Laramie, Gunslinger, Lawman, It Takes a Thief, Love American Style, and dozens of others. When we first began our interview series, A Word on Westerns, back in 2014, Ed joined me for an episode to share stories of working with Duke. He had the audience laughing so hard they were gasping for breath. What a charmer he was. No wonder everyone wanted to work with Ed. Off-screen, Ed had a long, steady family life. Married to Barbara Baldwin with 4 children, he later stepped away from acting, returning occasionally for appearances in voice work. Ed Faulkner died August 26, 2025 in Vista, California, of natural causes. He was 93 years old. Born in Depression-era Chicago on May 2, 1932, Bruce Herbert Glover grew up in a tough working-class neighborhood where he later joked, wanting to be an actor would have been like wearing a dress. Glover served in the U.S. Army from 1953 to 55, including 6 months in Korea. He returned with malaria that ended his hopes of a football career. He studied speech and theater at Northwestern University and began building a stage resume that eventually included Broadway, working opposite Bette Davis in The Night of the Iguana and Anne Bancroft in Mother Courage and Her Children. Glover headed west in the mid-1960s, and his angular face and fierce intensity made him a natural bad guy. He first rode into Dodge City in the 15th season Gunsmoke episode Corryville, playing Titus Wiley, a rough-edged rowdy who gets caught in a small-town power play and is framed for murder. Glover was excellent as a bad man, a hard case being tried for a crime he didn't commit. It was Glover's favorite of his 2 Gunsmoke episodes. The other, 3 years later was called The Drummer. Both Gunsmokes were directed by Bernard Mecavity, who also directed Glover in the big-screen Western comedy One Little Indian starring James Garner. Alongside Morgan Woodward, Vera Miles, and a young Jodie Foster, Glover is one of the army men chasing Garner's camel-riding deserter across the desert. Disney's Scandalous John cast him as a modern ranch hand pestering Brian Keith's aging cowhand. Beyond Gunsmoke, Glover roamed television's frontier frequently. On Bonanza's What Are Partners For?, he stirs up trouble with Slim Pickens landing Hoss in jail. He's in the Big Valley episode Hunter's Moon about a jealous husband all ready to hang Nick Barkley at dawn for a supposed affair with his wife. In The Over the Hill Gang, a 1969 TV movie, Glover plays a deputy under Jack Elam's gun-happy sheriff, backing a cast of old pros like Walter Brennan, Pat O'Brien, and Chill Wills. It's a light-hearted Western comedy about retired Texas Rangers cleaning up a crooked town. One of his best Western showcases was Yuma in 1971. It's a TV movie shot at Old Tucson, starring Clint Walker as Dave Harmon, the new marshal trying to bring order to a rough Arizona town. Glover and Bing Russell, Kurt's dad, are stage-robbing brothers on the wild side. Of course, when Big Clint blasts Glover with a double-barreled shotgun, the surviving clan, led by Morgan Woodward, blames the marshal, and there's a showdown in the streets of Yuma. With Sean Connery as James Bond in Diamonds Are Forever, Glover played the assassin Mr. Wint opposite Putter Smith's Mr. Kidd. Glover created a unique character with an offbeat, playful, gay menace. His acting choices made Wint and Kidd among the most unforgettable henchmen in the Bond series. Glover became a familiar face to mainstream audiences as Deputy Grady Coker in Walking Tall in 1973. He was playing the loyal but sardonic lawman backing Joe Don Baker's club-swinging Sheriff Buford Pusser in his war on Tennessee corruption. Glover was back as the same character in the sequel, Walking Tall Part 2, but without Joe Don. Two of Glover's signature 1970s roles found him in Depression-era settings that now play like companion pieces. In Roman Polanski's Chinatown in 1974, he's Duffy, a strong-arm detective working with Jack Nicholson's cynical private eye. The film is a classic and subject of books and revivals. At a 2019 screening, Glover joined Hawk Koch and others for a rousing Q&A of memories. Walter Hill's Hard Times in 1975 was his second Depression-era setting film. It cast him as a New Orleans mobster bankrolling illegal bare-knuckle fights for Charles Bronson's Drifter. The film, shot on atmospheric Louisiana locations, pits Bronson and James Coburn against back-alley bruisers while Glover leans on them for his cut. It's a classic mix of Glover's sly humor and threat. That same blend of menace and humor colored his later work in low-budget horror and genre pictures like Ghost Town, Popcorn, Warlock, The Armageddon, Night of the Scarecrow, and Die Hard Dracula. Those films offered him exactly what a character actor savors: colorful villains, steady work, and creative freedom in a field where budgets were small, but the parts were big. Glover never stopped thinking like a stage actor, and he ran classes and workshops in Los Angeles and eventually built an acting studio in his West L.A. home. Off-screen, Glover married actress and dancer Betty Corber. The two remained together until her death in 2016 and had 2 sons, including actor-director Crispin. Bruce continued working well into his 80s and worked together with Crispin several times, including No, You're Wrong, Crispin's long-gestating project they co-wrote and Crispin directed. It was his last on-screen performance. When we held the launch of Steve Carver's book of photographs, Western Portraits, at the Autry Museum, Bruce, who's in it, invited us to his home for an interview. His house was filled with memorabilia, from artwork to prizes he had won. He suggested having our conversation in his living room amongst his treasures. A portion of that conversation is up on YouTube as one of our most memorable episodes. Catch it if you can. We were lucky to have him share some memories for us and for you, his fans. From factory kid to Bond villain, from dusty TV Western streets to experimental indie cinema, Bruce Glover carved out a singular niche, the wiry, watchful presence who could turn a single scene into something to remember. Bruce Glover died in Los Angeles on March 12, 2025, at the age of 92. Canadian First Nations actor Graham Greene, a proud member of the Oneida Nation, was born June 22, 1952, on the Six Nations of the Grand River Reserve in Ontario. Before he ever set foot in front of a movie camera, he was working a string of jobs: draftsman, steelworker, welder, and audio technician. Professional theater and Canadian television work eventually led him to the role that changed everything, the role of Kicking Bird, the Lakota holy man in Kevin Costner's Oscar-winning epic Dances with Wolves in 1990. His understated performance earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor, and it made him an international symbol of more authentic Native representation on screen. Westerns became a through line in Greene's career. After Dances with Wolves, he co-starred in the modern reservation-set mystery Thunderheart, stealing scenes as a wisecracking tribal cop who teams up with Val Kilmer's FBI agent to investigate a political murder in the South Dakota Badlands where it was filmed. It was a neo-Western that let Greene mix wry humor with righteous anger over contemporary Native issues. Another film based on the true story of the forgotten tribe of California Native Americans, Graham played Ishi in The Last of His Tribe. He then shifted gears to a broad comic Western in Richard Donner's Maverick, again stealing scenes, this time from Mel Gibson and Jodie Foster as a seemingly stereotypical Indian who's actually in on the con. On television, he was Slick Nakia in 2002's Skinwalkers, Robert Redford's first attempt to bring Tony Hillerman's Native American mystery novels to the screen, which also included the follow-up titles A Thief of Time and Coyote Waits. Much later, Graham played Crow Elder Spotted Eagle in 1883, the Yellowstone prequel with Sam Elliott. Greene also became a significant presence in modern Western storytelling on TV. From 2012 to 2017, he appeared as Malachi Strand, a corrupt former tribal police chief and one of Sheriff Walt Longmire's most dangerous adversaries on Longmire. He turned up in Taylor Sheridan's Western-tinged drama Wind River, and even the video game Red Dead Redemption 2, where he voiced the dignified Lakota chief, Rain's Fall. Off-screen, Greene's life was rich, but not without struggle. Greene acknowledged a major depressive episode in the late 1990s that led to hospitalization after a suicide attempt. In his final years, Greene remained busy, popping up in acclaimed series like Reservation Dogs. He was the title character Maximus in an episode of that splendid series. He guest starred on The Last of Us and on INSP's Blue Ridge. He appeared in The Lowdown with Ethan Hawke, who spoke highly of Graham's grace, wisdom, wit, and depth. His last Western was Trail of Vengeance in 2025, starring Jeff Fahey and Rumer Willis. Greene repeatedly said he wanted his people shown as more than stoic figures. "My people are funny," he reminded interviewers.
53 years in the business. I retired a couple years ago from film. And my phone hasn't stopped ringing. I've done about 10 films since then. I turned to my wife one day and I said, I should have done this about 15 or 20 years ago.
I was honored to meet Graham in 2003 when he received a Golden Boot Award presented by Martin Kove, and to tell him how much I enjoyed his work. I spoke with him last April when he was inducted into the Hall of Great Western Performers in Oklahoma City. He seemed tired, but agreed to join me for a Word on Westerns interview. Unfortunately, there wasn't time. For audiences who love Westerns, Graham Greene's legacy is that of opening the trail for generations of indigenous actors to ride behind him. After a long illness, Graham died September 1st in Strathmore, Ontario, from natural causes. He was only 73 years old. On film, Gene Hackman worked across every genre: action, drama, comedy, historical romance. But in westerns, he gave us some of the most unsettling and memorable portraits of power the genre has ever seen. The sexually sadistic cattleman in The Hunting Party, the weary horseman with a strict moral code in Bite the Bullet, the insecure bully in Unforgiven, the god-king tyrant of the quick and the dead. Eugene Allen Gene Hackman was born January 30th, 1930 in San Bernardino, California, but he grew up mostly in Danville, Illinois, in a fractured household that left him eager to prove himself. At 16, he lied about his age to join the U.S. Marine Corps. After his discharge, Hackman enrolled in the Pasadena Playhouse, where he and classmate Dustin Hoffman were infamously voted the least likely to succeed. When Hackman moved to New York, his real education began. Off-Broadway plays, tiny TV roles on Tallahassee 7000, Naked City, and East Side, West Side. He shared apartments with Hoffman and their friend Robert Duvall, while all three of them waited tables and took whatever jobs they could get. Returning to California to work in episodic television, his one TV Western role was on Iron Horse, starring Dale Robertson and Gary Collins. Hackman had his first substantial film role in Lilith in 1964. It starred Gene Seberg and Warren Beatty. Beatty liked what he saw because 3 years later, as producer and star of Bonnie and Clyde in 1967, Beatty pushed to cast Hackman as Clyde's doomed brother, Buck Barrow, a part that earned Hackman his first Oscar nomination and essentially launched his film career. From there came The French Connection in 1971, acclaimed for its gritty realism and memorable car chase through the streets of Brooklyn. The movie, based on the true story of cop Popeye Doyle's attempt to capture a heroin trafficker, is a classic that revolutionized cop movies and won 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Actor for Hackman as Popeye. Other landmark films include Francis Ford Coppola's The Conversation, Superman starring Christopher Reeve with Gene as his nemesis Lex Luthor, Hoosiers with Gene in top form in a true story as an intense high school basketball coach, Mississippi Burning starring Gene and Willem Dafoe as 2 FBI agents in the 1960s fighting racism and bigotry in the rural South. His legacy in Westerns is on the big screen, where he became one of the most compelling non-cowboy cowboys of his generation. The Hunting Party in 1971 cast him as a vicious cattle baron who uses a high-powered rifle and a private train full of rich sportsmen to hunt down Oliver Reed and the outlaws who've kidnapped his wife, Candace Bergen. The kidnapping was just so that Reed, the outlaw, could learn to read. The film is a chilling portrait of class cruelty, with Hackman compelling as the distraught husband. He shifted gears in Zandy's Bride, playing a rough, isolated rancher on the California coast who sends for a mail-order bride, Lee Volman. Filmed on location along Big Sur, the film is a quiet, adult Western about 2 stubborn people learning to build a life together on a hard, hard land. Bite the Bullet may be his purest cowboy showcase. In Richard Brooks's ensemble Western, Hackman plays a former Rough Rider riding alongside James Coburn and Candace Bergen in a 700-mile endurance horse race. The film has humor, morality, and tense action. Hackman spends most of the picture in the saddle. He later singled out a quiet scene at a desert waterhole, confiding in Bergen's character as one of the favorite moments of his entire career. In Unforgiven, Clint Eastwood's 1992 revisionist Western, he plays Little Bill Daggett, the folksy but brutal sheriff whose idea of order is as terrifying as the outlaws he hunts. Hackman initially turned down Unforgiven because his daughters were tired of him doing violent films, and he himself was uneasy about more brutality. Eastwood, however, persuaded him that the picture was really an argument against violence, and Hackman signed on. Hackman's Little Bill embodies the cruelty of respectable power and won him his second Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. In Geronimo, an American Legend in 1993, he appears as Brigadier General George Crook, the seasoned Indian fighter torn between military duty and his sympathy for the Apache people, alongside Wes Studi, Jason Patrick, Matt Damon, and his old roommate, Robert Duvall. Utah and Arizona landscapes provide the backdrop for Walter Hill's large-scale retelling of the Apache Wars. In 1994's Wyatt Earp, Hackman is Nicholas Earp, the stern, unforgiving father who hammers a code of toughness and family loyalty into a young Wyatt, played by Kevin Costner. The next year, Hackman strapped on 2 guns for the quick and the dead. It was director Sam Raimi's tribute to spaghetti westerns. Hackman was the tyrant who owns the town and runs a deadly fast draw tournament that pits Hackman against Sharon Stone, Russell Crowe, Lance Hendrickson, and a very young Leonardo DiCaprio. On set, Hackman was known as a consummate professional, yet within that discipline he could improvise brilliantly. In Young Frankenstein, he famously ad-libbed his blind hermit's farewell. "I was going to make espresso." Gene and Eastwood worked together again on Absolute Power, with Hackman playing a corrupt U.S. president opposite Eastwood's master thief. Hackman was frank that not every job was art. He took the Poseidon Adventure for the money and claimed never to have seen the movie. After his final film, the comedy Welcome to Mooseport in 2004, Hackman quietly stepped away from acting. He embarked on a new career as an author and poured his energy into writing. His books sold respectably and gave Hackman a satisfying second creative life. On February 26, 2025, Hackman and his second wife Betsy were found dead at their home near Santa Fe. A remote home and some conflicting early clues sparked public fascination. It was a mystery that captured the media for days until an autopsy report said that Hackman died of severe heart disease with advanced Alzheimer's cited as a contributing factor, and that his wife had died accidentally roughly a week later. He was 95, she was 64. Rex Holman, born Roy Eugene Baker December 11, 1935 in Tulsa, Oklahoma, was one of those lean, sharp-edged character actors who seemed to live in the West, riding into town, stirring up trouble, and often getting shot out of the saddle before the end credits. After moving west with his family, Holman attended Pierce Junior College in Woodland Hills, California, and began building practical experience that led him into steady TV work. His first feature was a bit part in the forgotten low-budget Ma Barker's Killer Brood, starring Lorene Tuttle. It was on TV westerns that Holman would make an impression, and he worked constantly during the 1960s and 70s in the genre. On the feature side, Holman's westerns include the 1960 western Young Jesse James as Zack, with top-billed Ray Strickland as Jesse. 1964's The Quick Gun, where he was part of a family scheme against Audie Murphy's returning gunfighter. Rex showed his comedy side with The Three Stooges and The Outlaws Is Coming, featuring a soon-to-be caped crusader, Adam West. Holman's trek through TV westerns is basically a greatest hits tour. His first was The High Bridge, an episode of Overland Trail, Doug McClure's first series. Rawhide, Bonanza, Have Gun Will Travel, Wagon Train, 6 guest spots on the Big Valley, including Danger Road, written by D.C. Fontana, 6 episodes of The Virginian, Lancer, Death Valley Days, and more, including an incredible 16 episodes on Gunsmoke. On the 1966 TV series The Road West, Rex, John Barrymore Jr., and Terry Wilson are part of a gang of Confederate marauders led by George C. Scott. They terrorized travelers Barry Sullivan, Glenn Corbett, Catherine Hayes, and Andrew Prine. The Color hour-long series was canceled after only 29 episodes, so several episodes, headlining, of course, guest star George C. Scott, were cut together and released as a feature film called This Savage Land in 1969. Walter Brennan used Rex several times in his series The Guns of Will Sonnet. When Brennan produced and starred in the comedy western The Over the Hill Gang, Rex is one of the crooked Sheriff Jack Elam's deputies. Perhaps the most famous gunfight recreation Rex Holman ever appeared in is the one from the original Star Trek. It's an episode called Spectre of the Gun. Captain Kirk and the boys are being punished for trespassing in outer space and are sent back in time to Tombstone, Arizona in 1881, where they soon realize that they are the Clantons up against Wyatt Earp and his brothers at the OK Corral. Ron Sobel is Wyatt and Rex is Morgan Earp. Holman's final film appearance was a return of sorts in the feature film Star Trek V: The Final Frontier. He was cast as Alien John and directed by William Shatner. Holman also had a genuine music side. In 1970, he released the now cult LP, Here in the Land of Victory. Because we recently showed Arch Hall Jr.'s Deadwood 76 on our channel, I was very surprised to discover that Rex Holman sang the theme song. Quentin Tarantino, as he usually does, honors veteran character actors. For Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, he got permission and used a clip of Rex from a Burt Reynolds TV cop show. Then, using CGI, inserted Leonardo DiCaprio into the episode. It was a fitting tribute to an actor who had portrayed many, many memorable villains. Rex Holman is an actor whose face we may not instantly name, but whose work we never forget. He was a veteran of over 100 films and TV shows. Rex Holman died January 9, 2025, at the age of 89. Freckle-faced Jimmy Hunt was one of the busiest child actors of the late 1940s and early 1950s, racking up some 35 film appearances before he was out of his teens. But for most movie fans, he'll always be the boy who sounded the alarm in Invaders from Mars. Born in Los Angeles, December 4, 1939, Jimmy Hunt was plucked from grammar school in Culver City by an MGM talent scout because, with his curly hair and freckles, he looked like a young Van Johnson. He was put under contract at MGM and made his acting debut as a young Johnson in High Barbaree. He was a natural actor, and because he could sell both terror and tears, Jimmy became a reliable presence in family pictures and thrillers. Between assignments as the kid in Pitfall, Louisa, and Sorry Wrong Number, Hunt's education continued in the studio's famed Little Red Schoolhouse, alongside classmates like Roddy McDowall, Margaret O'Brien, and teenage Elizabeth Taylor. He was one of Clifton Webb and Myrna Loy's brood in Cheaper by the Dozen and its sequel, Bells on Their Toes. Jimmy's favorite movie memories are of the two Technicolor westerns he made with Joel McCrea. The first was Saddle Tramp in 1950, a year he appeared in two other westerns. They were director John Sturges' The Captive, starring Lou Ayres and Teresa Wright, and Rock Island Trail with Forrest Tucker. In Saddle Tramp in 1950, McCrea's wandering cowhand is headed for California when a tragic accident leaves him responsible for a widower's 4 young sons. Jimmy is one of the boys. McCrea hides out in a camp while he hires out on a ranch owned by John McIntyre and Jeanette Nolan. Nice casting. They were married in real life. McCrea secretly tries to keep his makeshift family fed and finally faces down a gang of cattle rustlers with the help of a young runaway, played by Wanda Hendricks. The cast also includes John Russell. The second McCrea film is the impressive one. It's The Lone Hand, shot in 1953 against the rugged canyons and rivers around Durango in the Colorado Rockies. Jimmy is given the key role of McCrea's son, who narrates the story. It's of a widowed father, a farmer in the 1870s frontier town of Timberline, who seems to throw in with an outlaw gang, only for Jimmy to learn that his dad is really an undercover Pinkerton agent trying to discover the gang's secret boss. Barbara Hale plays McCrea's new wife, with Alex Nichol and a young James Arness menacing the town and Jimmy. Arness chases Jimmy up the side of a mountain and falls to his death, something the boy keeps secret. Jimmy recalled working on those films and on location as an adventure and remembered McCrea as a special guy who treated him like a professional. For film fans, Jimmy's most remembered movie is the classic sci-fi Technicolor feature directed by William Cameron Menzies, the still frightening Invaders from Mars from 1953. Hearing bizarre noises late at night, Jimmy wakes up to see a spaceship landing. No one believes him. It's one of the most memorable sci-fi films of the '50s and scared lots of youngsters with its plot of aliens taking over minds of humans. Jimmy can identify the aliens by a black spot on the back of their neck. Leif Erikson and Hilary Brooke are Jimmy's parents, and they get really scary. Are they possessed? There are giant, hulking Martians lumbering stiffly through underground tunnels. Adults vanishing in a vortex of sand. Yikes! The meager budget does not work against this classic because Menzies, the director, is a genius production designer. The imagery and the movie are unforgettable. Then, at just 14 years of age, Jimmy Hunt walked away from stardom. By his own account, deciding he'd rather play sports in high school than keep making movies. Then he attended college and served 3 years in the U.S. Army, working in communications and code-breaking while stationed in Germany. There he met his wife-to-be, Roswitha. They married in 1963, and their long, happy marriage lasted more than 6 decades with 3 children, 8 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. Jimmy and I met for the first time at a film festival, and he joined me at the Autry in Los Angeles, November 2022, for a Word on Westerns conversation and to talk about his amazing career to a packed house of fans. It was wonderful to hear stories of what it was like to work with so many cinema legends and to see him still be recognized by his many fans. We were fortunate he joined us. Jimmy Hunt died from complications of a heart attack in Simi Valley at the age of 85, July 18, 2025. Will Hutchins, who was the title character of the popular early television series Sugarfoot, was the last of the major Warner Brothers Western TV stars. Born Marshall Lowell Hutchison, May 5, 1930 in Los Angeles, Will grew up in Burbank. His future workplace, Warner Brothers Studios, was practically in his backyard. After attending Pomona College and UCLA, Will spent 2 years in the Army. While at Pomona, he met Richard Chamberlain, and together they staged a play where Will was spotted and signed by agent Richard Clayton. Will was cast in episodes of Conflict and Warner Brothers Presents, anthology series the studio was producing. While filming an episode written by actor-writer Montgomery Pittman, Will and Pittman hit it off and became good friends. Will was then signed to a contract at Warner Brothers where his easygoing personality and charm made him the perfect choice as the lead of a new series called Sugarfoot. Back in the 1950s, the standard season for a TV series was 39 episodes a year. When Warner Brothers hit television gold in 1955 with Cheyenne, TV's first hour-long Western, the studio realized that big 6'6" Clint Walker wouldn't be able to physically star in that many episodes a year without ending up looking like Don Knotts. So another 1 hour-long Western was created to rotate the time slot. It was Sugarfoot, one of the best Westerns of the era, with an unknown young actor, Will Hutchins, as the lead. The pilot was based on a charming comedy Western movie that had starred Will Rogers Jr. called The Boy from Oklahoma. That movie became the basis for Sugarfoot, the story of an easy lope and cattle rope Tom Brewster, who was studying to become a lawyer as he roamed the West. Will's friend Montgomery Pittman wrote several of Will's Sugarfoot episodes, including Will's appearances as the Canary Kid and Outlaw. He got to play a sarsaparilla-swilling hero and also a smoking, whiskey-guzzling bad guy, and he had a blast. In the trial of the Canary Kid, Pittman polished an existing script by adding Warner Brothers Western stars Peter Brown, Wade Preston, and Ty Hardin to the story. It was Will's favorite episode from the series. As a Warner Brothers contract player, Will cut an LP and co-starred in several movies, including 2 classic war films, Lafayette Escadrille, directed by Oscar winner William Wellman, and featuring an exciting cast of young Warner Brothers talent, with William Wellman Jr. portraying his father. In Merrill's Marauders, starring Jeff Chandler and directed by the great Sam Fuller, Hutch was prominently featured in the true story of the World War II fighting force. When Sugarfoot ended, Will appeared with James Arness as a hunted killer on Gunsmoke in the classic episode Blind Man's Bluff. He lent a heartfelt sympathy to the character. Jack Nicholson, needing a recognizable name to headline an independent Western he was producing, hired Will as the star of The Shooting. The Monty Hellman-directed cult favorite co-starred Nicholson, Warren Oates, and Millie Perkins. Will's comedy chops were on screen as he headlined 2 TV sitcoms. Unfortunately, neither lasted more than 1 season. In 1966, it was Hey Landlord, with Will as a young man who inherits an apartment building in New York. The second was a redo of Blondie, based on the popular newspaper strip with Patricia Hardy as Blondie, Will as husband, Dagwood Bumstead, and Jim Backus as Dagwood's boss, Mr. Dithers. Will also co-starred with Elvis Presley in a couple of the King's lesser musicals, Spin Out and Clambake. He went to South Africa to headline Shangani Patrol, the true story of volunteer soldiers fighting in Rhodesia in 1893. Former fellow TV Western star Clint Eastwood cast Will in a cameo with Dirty Harry in 1973's Magnum Force. Will then left the business, went to Sarasota, Florida, and became a ringmaster and a clown in traveling circuses. In the mid-1960s, Will was briefly married to Chrissy Burnett, Carol's younger sister. They had 1 child. From 1988 until his death, Will was blessed to have found his soulmate, Babs. They married in 1988. Her humor matched his always positive hijinks. They moved to Glen Head, New York, in an apartment filled with memorabilia collected over the years. I first met Will in 1979 during the taping of the TV Western All-Star reunion When the West Was Fun. Will was also honored with a Golden Boot Award in 2002 presented to him by his old friend, Clint Walker. In 2001, Will joined me for an exclusive Award on Western's Zoom interview with Will in New York and me in Hollywood. We had a lot of laughs and chatted so long that 2 episodes were edited and can both be seen on our channel. After a long illness, fan favorite and friend, Will Hutchins died of respiratory failure April 21, 2025. He was 95 years old. Oscar winner Claude Jarman Jr. was born September 27, 1934 in Nashville, Tennessee. He was the son of a railroad accountant. A regular kid in local children's theater, he was discovered at the age of 10 when MGM director Clarence Brown, on a nationwide talent search, visited his 5th grade classroom and immediately wanted him for the role of Jody Baxter in the 1946 film The Yearling. Claude Jarman Jr. was that special actor who brought a childlike innocence to his first film role. For his performance as the boy in The Yearling who persuades his parents to let him adopt a young deer, Claude received a special Miniature Academy Award. As a teenager, he made 11 films in all, including another with director Brown, the classic Intruder in the Dust in 1949, MGM's Outriders with Joel McCrea, Hangman's Knot with Randolph Scott, Donna Reed, and Lee Marvin, The Great Locomotive Chase with Fess Parker, and John Ford's cavalry western, Rio Grande in 1950. Claude was 15 years old when he portrayed the son of John Wayne and Maureen O'Hara in Ford's classic. The young actor had just finished Roughshod, co-starring as Robert Serling's brother in the rugged noir western where he discovered a love of horseback riding. He got a casting call to meet with Ford and was soon out at Fat Jones's stable in the valley, learning to ride 2 horses at once while standing up. Rio Grande was part of Ford's cavalry trilogy, the others being Fort Apache and She Wore a Yellow Ribbon. Jarman shared delightful memories of becoming Director Ford's pet during production of Rio Grande, probably mused Claude, because of the daredevil Roman writing in the film that wasn't even in the script. Jarman is Trooper York, Wayne's rebellious son, washed out of West Point and now assigned to a western outpost commanded by his stern father. When Wayne's wife appears in camp to try to convince her son to return east, the great romance between Wayne and O'Hara, their first pairing, is rekindled. Claude was witness to magic happening on screen. It's perhaps Ford's most intensely romantic film. Loaded with unofficial Ford stock company of actors shot in Moab, Utah, filled with heart, humor, and that fancy Roman writing, Rio Grande was a wonderful experience for audiences and a young Claude. During the COVID pandemic, I was fortunate to do a remote Zoom with Claude from his home in San Francisco, November 2020. We got together in person several times after that, spending time at film festivals, hanging out with his dear friend of 70 years, the younger Patrick Wayne. I even set up an interview with the two of them together discussing and screening their film, Rio Grande. What a thrill that was for me in the packed house at the Lone Pine Film Festival. When his MGM contract ended, Claude stepped away from acting, returned to Nashville, finished college at Vanderbilt, then served 3 years in the U.S. Navy doing public relations work. Moving to San Francisco, he shifted permanently behind the scenes, first as the city's Director of Cultural Affairs, then as Executive Director of the San Francisco International Film Festival from 1965 to 1980, where he built the event into a major international showcase. After leaving the festival, he founded Jarman Travel, Inc. in 1986 and later wrote a memoir, My Life and the Final Days of Hollywood, in 2018. Claude Jarman Jr. died at his home in Kentfield, California on January 12, 2025, aged 90. He was laid to rest at Woodland Memorial Park in Nashville, returning in death to the city where his remarkable journey from schoolboy to Oscar-winning child star began. Val Edward Kilmer was born in Los Angeles on New Year's Eve, 1959. For a while in the late 1980s and early 90s, he was that actor who seemed to be everywhere at once, flying fighter jets, wielding a batarang, on the run as an L.A. bank robber. But for Western fans, he'll always be the deadliest dentist in Arizona, Doc Holliday in Tombstone. Val was the middle of 3 boys in a family. His parents divorced when he was 8. He went to Chatsworth High School in California. His classmates there included Kevin Spacey and Mare Winningham, whom he dated. From there, he jumped to Juilliard, the youngest student ever accepted into the drama division at the time. Val turned down a role in Francis Ford Coppola's The Outsiders so he could do a play on Broadway with Kevin Bacon and Sean Penn. His film debut in the 1984 spy spoof Top Secret showed a loose, comical sense of timing that didn't always come through after he got cast as Iceman in the 1986 blockbuster Top Gun. He became a box office name overnight. For Western fans, though, the real story starts with Gore Vidal's Billy the Kid, an overlooked 1989 TNT movie shot on location in Arizona. Kilmer plays William Bonney, giving the outlaw a goofy, jittery intelligence. The film surrounded him with character pros like Wilfred Brimley, Michael Parks, and Duncan Ruger as Billy's friend Pat Garrett. Oliver Stone's The Doors let him disappear into Jim Morrison so completely that even the surviving Doors band members sometimes had trouble telling whether they were hearing Kilmer or Morrison on the soundtrack. In Thunderheart, he plays a mixed-blood FBI agent drawn into Native American activism on a poverty-stricken Sioux reservation. Written by John Fusco, Thunderheart is a thought-provoking murder mystery with solid performances by Val, Sam Shepard, Graham Greene, and Fred Ward. The casting of Val rings true in this film. He is 1/8 Cherokee on his dad's side. Then came Tombstone and the role that would follow him for the rest of his life. The 1993 Western retells the OK Corral story and the Earp Vendetta ride with Russell as Wyatt Earp, Sam Elliott and Bill Paxton as brothers Virgil and Morgan, and Michael Biehn as a frighteningly coiled Johnny Ringo. Kilmer's gun and cup-twirling duel with Biehn twirling a 6-gun is only one of dozens and dozens of unforgettable scenes. The movie, written by its original director John Fusco, was a hit and became a full blown-out cult classic, with critics and audiences singling out Kilmer as the standout. To this day, a lot of Western fans are still saying, "Why wasn't Val nominated for an Oscar?" I am one of those fans. Batman Forever let him step into the cape and cowl, fighting classic comic book foes Two-Face and the Riddler, Tommy Lee Jones and Jim Carrey. That was followed by Heat, Michael Mann's realistic look at the criminal underworld in Los Angeles. Val is part of Robert De Niro's team of professional thieves being chased by cop Al Pacino. The entire cast was superb, so you root for the good guys and the bad guys. Plus, the action sequences are astonishing, with Val holding his own in that downtown LA shootout. In 2003, when he learned that The Missing, a Western, was being filmed by director Ron Howard about 1 hour from his New Mexico ranch, Val called up his old friend and asked if there was a role for him. Ron gladly gave Val a part that only took 3 days to film, and his scene is close to 13 minutes long. His Western work didn't stop. In 2008's Comanche Moon, a CBS miniseries set on the Texas frontier, and a Lonesome Dove prequel, the story follows younger versions of Gus McCrae and Woodrow Call, with Val as a vain, fearless Yankee aristocrat leading Texas Rangers against Comanche Raiders. In Wyatt Earp's Revenge, a very modest 2012 direct-to-video Western, Kilmer graduates from Lunger sidekick to the legend himself. The film has an aging Wyatt Earp, played by Kilmer, being interviewed by a reporter. As the elder Earp remembers, the movie cuts between Kilmer's reflective lawman and Sean Roberts as the younger gunfighter chasing a killer across Kansas. It's not Tombstone, but it lets Val become the only actor to portray both Doc Holliday and his fellow legend Wyatt Earp in a movie. Val could be demanding. Stories from The Island of Dr. Moreau, Batman Forever, and other sets helped cement a reputation for being difficult, and some directors swore they'd never work with him again. At the same time, collaborators like Michael Mann and Francis Ford Coppola praised his preparation and intensity, and Western co-stars from Tombstone remembered that while he stayed locked into Doc Holliday on set, his commitment was what made the performance unforgettable. Around 2014-15, Val began losing his voice, eventually revealing that he'd been treated for throat cancer. He chronicled the ordeal in his 2020 memoir, I'm Your Huckleberry, and in the compelling 2021 documentary Val. For Top Gun Maverick, his final film, director Joseph Kosinski used Kilmer's real altered voice and digital cleanup to give fans one more quiet moment between Iceman and Maverick. Val Kilmer died of pneumonia in Los Angeles, April 1st, 2025. He was 65. Official records list complications from throat cancer treatment, including respiratory failure and severe weight loss as underlying factors. He was cremated a few days later. For Western fans, his guns are finally silent. But that drawling line from Tombstone still hangs in the air. He really was our Huckleberry. Michael Madsen was born September 25, 1957, and raised in Chicago, far from Hollywood polish. He worked jobs like painting houses and at a car wash before the acting bug struck. What pulled him toward performing wasn't fame so much as the mystique of screen presence, like Robert Mitchum. Madsen was the kind of actor who could stroll into a scene, say almost nothing, and still make you nervous. He built a career playing dangerous men with a poet's stillness. Yet for Western fans, his legacy is anchored by two very different rides into the genre. Lawrence Kasdan's sweeping Wyatt Earp in 1994, where he played Virgil Earp, and Quentin Tarantino's snowbound chamber western, The Hateful Eight, in 2015, where he showed up as the sly drifter Joe Gage. His real doorway into the business was the Chicago theater scene. Madsen worked with Steppenwolf, where he served as an apprentice under John Malkovich, learning the craft and the kind of actor-to-actor listening that later became one of his trademarks. Hollywood started calling in the early 1980s, including early screen work like War Games and The Natural. But the role that branded him forever came in 1992, Mr. Blonde, in Quentin Tarantino's influential first feature, Reservoir Dogs. Madsen is so cool, it's practically a warning of things to come. He became one of Tarantino's defining discoveries on that debut, and the two stayed creatively connected for decades. They worked together again in Kill Bill, with Madsen a sword-wielding killer. Of course, in a Tarantino film, there is an abundance of humor and violence. Madsen fit right in. Then came the Western fork in the road. When Tarantino developed Pulp Fiction, Madsen was offered the role of Vincent Vega, a decision hampered by his commitment to Wyatt Earp. In a later interview, he admitted the choice haunted him. For Western lovers, though, Wyatt Earp is where Madsen did something deeper than tough guy cool. As Virgil, he's the steadying brother standing shoulder to shoulder with Kevin Costner and Dennis Quaid in Kasdan's long-form take on the Earp holiday legends and the gunfight at the OK Corral. It was filmed on spectacular locations not in Arizona, but New Mexico. As for the Tombstone comparison, it's unavoidable because Kasdan's Wyatt Earp covers much the same territory and arrived soon after the earlier film was released. The early 90s seemed to have been an era of renewed Wyatt Earp interest and a mania with even a CBS television network film. Wyatt Earp returned to Tombstone, airing between the release of the two battling feature films. Madsen did return to the Western range later, most memorably with Tarantino in The Hateful Eight. The film's blizzard setting may be Wyoming on screen, but production was famously shot in southwest Colorado near Telluride. Real winter, real cold, real isolation. A story about strangers, secrets, and typical Tarantino violence. As Joe Gage, Madsen leaned into that frontier suspicion with a look you never trusted. Outside those two marquee titles, Madsen also drifted through other Western variations, including a disappointing adaptation of Blueberry, based on the celebrated Moebius graphic art stories. Madsen's face on a DVD cover must have meant sales because he made several Westerns that brought back the Poverty Row staples of the past. Cole Younger and the Black Train and A Sierra Nevada Gunfight are examples. One surprise Western that seemed to rise above the others is Outlaw Johnny Black in 2023. It's a lighthearted tribute to Westerns, produced, written, directed, and starring Michael J. White. Madsen is one of many in the film, a funny parody of blaxploitation and kung fu fighting with a bit of Blazing Saddles thrown in. Off-screen, family mattered, especially his relationship with his sister, actress Virginia Madsen. Accounts describe a close bond, and they did work together. She appeared with him in the 2007 mockumentary Being Michael Madsen. He also authored several volumes of poetry, revealing a sensitivity rarely shown on screen. For the record, Madsen had legal trouble tied to alcohol. In 2019, he pleaded no contest to a DUI-related charge after a Malibu crash and was sentenced to jail time and probation. In 2024, he was also arrested on a misdemeanor domestic battery allegation. Madsen died July 3, 2025, at his home in Malibu, California. Multiple reports said he was found unresponsive and that cardiac arrest was believed to have been the cause. He was 67 years old. She was born Joan Marie O'Brien on Valentine's Day, February the 14th, 1936, in Cambridge, Massachusetts. O'Brien may best be remembered as getting wedged with Cary Grant and Tony Curtis in the small hallway of a submarine in the comedy Operation Petticoat. But she was also in two westerns with John Wayne. As a child, she moved with her family to California and took dance lessons from a young age. Her professional breakthrough was on a music variety television show, notably Cliffy Stone's local country music show, Hometown Jamboree. Her musical polish stayed with her and proved to be a valuable asset. Her versatility allowed producers to use her as a believable singer on screen, which she did on several shows. On one of the 3 Bat Masterson TV episodes she made, Shakedown at St. Joe, she guest starred as an up-and-coming soprano and Bat's old flame. On a Rawhide episode, The Pitch Woman, she was cast as the wife of Buddy Ebsen, a traveling huckster who joins the cattle drive and promotes a concert for her. Yep, quite often, Joan got to sing on TV westerns. There was more to come. Her feature film appearances with John Wayne were back-to-back. The Alamo and The Comancheros, important for her and for him. In Duke's epic The Alamo in 1960, which he produced and directed, O'Brien played Sue Dickinson, one of the civilians caught in the human tide around the siege. Her husband was played by Ken Curtis. Their daughter was played by Duke's daughter, 4-year-old Aisa Wayne. A year later, she reteamed with Wayne for The Comancheros, playing Melinda Marshall amid a powder keg plot of guns, whiskey, and profiteers feeding Comanche unrest. The film's credited director was Michael Curtiz, but when Curtiz became too ill with cancer to finish, Wayne took over directing, uncredited, meaning O'Brien effectively worked under Wayne's on-set command again. And yes, Wayne's family is in the mix, and his daughter, Aisa Wayne, appears uncredited as Joan's daughter. Joan O'Brien could also deliver in a grittier Western mode, which she did with Audie Murphy in 6 Black Horses. She's the beautiful catalyst who hires 2 hard cases, Murphy and Dan Duryea, to escort her through dangerous territory with motives that aren't what they seem. With a script by Burt Kennedy, it's regarded as one of Audie Murphy's best films. Also in 1962, Joan co-starred in Samar, an 1870s action movie directed by and starring George Montgomery. It was shot in the Philippines with Gilbert Roland and Ziva Rodan. On television, O'Brien was equally at home riding into weekly trouble. She turned up on major TV westerns, including multiple appearances on Wagon Train, a very special episode with Joan and a wagon load of female singers trekking across the West. Joan and the ladies get to entertain the pioneers with several songs and rekindles a romance with Donald Woods. With Clint Walker in a Cheyenne episode called Incident at Dawson Flats, she's wary of Cheyenne. Her co-stars are Hampton Fancher, Gerald Moore, and Morris Ancrum. Joan also appeared on The Westerner in an episode directed by Sam Peckinpah called The Courting of Libby, and worked again with Audie Murphy, this time in The Idol, an episode of his TV series Whispering Smith. She was romanced by Gene Barry on another episode of his Bat Masterson series. She didn't sing in that one, but it did boast a supporting cast that included a couple of our guests from A Word on Westerns, veterans H.M. Wynant and Donna Martell. Joan O'Brien was one of those early 60s leading ladies who could step into a Western, a comedy, or a musical and look completely at home. Of course, she's widely remembered for Blake Edwards' hit comedy, Operation Petticoat, with Cary Grant and Tony Curtis. When Joan paired with Elvis Presley in It Happened at the World's Fair, she became the King's leading lady, both on screen and off. In It's Only Money, Frank Tashlin's slapstick Jerry Lewis comedy, she's Jerry's misbegotten, beleaguered, and beautiful, beautiful girlfriend. By the mid-1960s, Joan stepped away from screen acting. Accounts describe it as a mix of personal turbulence and a decision to focus on raising her children. What's often missed is that she didn't stop working. She built a successful business career as a management executive connected to Hilton Hotels, and she continued with music. She even sang with the Harry James Band later in the decade. Joan O'Brien died May 5, 2025 in San Antonio, Texas, after a battle with Alzheimer's disease. She was 89 years old. Charles Robert Redford Jr. was born August 18, 1936 in Santa Monica, California. He grew up in a working-class neighborhood of Los Angeles, the son of a milkman turned accountant, and a Texas-born mother who died when he was still a teenager. Summers spent with his maternal family in Texas and Arizona gave him a boy's eye view of big skies, rivers, and open country, an experience he later credited with awakening both his love of nature and his enduring fascination with the American West. A talented sketch artist, Redford earned a baseball scholarship to the University of Colorado, but drank his way out of school, later saying he had become the campus drunk before leaving to wander Europe and study art. Acting was originally a plan B, but New York stage work and early television soon pulled him into the business. His first credited screen role was on Maverick in the 1960 episode Iron Hand, playing a green but determined young cowhand who hires Bart Maverick to help with a cattle drive. Across the early 1960s, he popped up on other westerns such as The Virginian, playing paroled prisoner Matthew Cordell in the 1963 episode The Evil That Men Do. He felt that it was one of his strongest TV roles. Redford's TV Western guest shots were usually revenge tales where he played hot-headed bad guys rather than a hero. He was gunned down by the one-armed gunslinger called Tate in that series. In the last gunfight on The Deputy, Redford played an impulsive gunslinger. He often played troubled, impulsive young men, outsiders, already hinting at the wary, self-contained characters that would define his big-screen westerns. In 1962, Redford, who even earlier had had a small part in Tall Story, gets an introduced credit in War Hunt, a terrific low-budget anti-war film starring John Saxon. Set during the Korean War with Saxon as a psycho killer, War Hunt was important for Redford because he met fellow actor Sidney Pollack, who switched careers to become a director and frequent collaborator with Redford. Redford got more traction and notice on Broadway starring in Barefoot in the Park. That led to a series of feature films like The Chase, This Property is Condemned, and repeating his Barefoot part, starred in the 1967 feature film with Jane Fonda. Redford's breakout role on film came through with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid in 1969. Director George Roy Hill and star Paul Newman pushed for Redford, still better known as a TV actor than a lead in films. Steve McQueen had already turned the part down. They wanted Redford to take the role of the Sundance Kid, which was originally planned for Newman. Redford, who loved William Goldman's witty, irreverent script, was approved by the studio and quickly signed on. The movie reimagined the outlaw duo as charming, out-of-time anti-heroes. Redford's laconic Sundance, a crack shot with an ironic smile, played beautifully off Newman's talkative Butch, and the film became a defining hit of the late 1960s. It not only launched Redford to stardom, but welded his public identity to the West so firmly that he later named his Utah resort production company and eventually the Sundance Institute after the character. Following Butch Cassidy, Redford produced and starred in Downhill Racer and The Candidate. If Butch Cassidy made Redford a Western star, Jeremiah Johnson in 1972 made him a Western myth. In director Sidney Pollack's film, Redford plays a disillusioned Mexican War veteran who turns his back on civilization to live as a mountain man in the Rockies, only to be drawn into a brutal cycle of survival, love, loss, and revenge. The movie was shot largely on location in Utah, in country that would later be associated with Redford's Sundance Resort. He often cited Jeremiah Johnson as one of his own favorite films, valuing its physical authenticity, its sparse dialogue, and its focus on a man pitted against the elements rather than against cities or politics. The solitary mountain man, based on the life of Liver Eaton Johnson, clearly resonated with Redford's own temperament. In 1973, he starred in two big hits, The Way We Were, a politically tinged, nostalgic romance with Barbra Streisand and Redford as an unlikely twosome who fall in love, separate, and then reconnect. The film was magical, a great romantic movie with a hit song to match, and The Sting, reuniting him with Newman to pull off the big con in a stunningly dressed 1930s setting. Director George Roy Hill made another classic. The Sting was awarded an Oscar for Best Film and Redford nominated as Best Actor. his only nomination in that category. Next came All the President's Men and The Natural. As Sidney Pollack moved into directing, he repeatedly turned to Redford. Their partnership yielded 7 features. This Property is Condemned, Jeremiah Johnson, The Way We Were, 3 Days of the Condor, The Electric Horseman, Out of Africa, and Havana. In The Electric Horseman, 1979, Redford plays a washed-up rodeo star who steals a mistreated corporate mascot horse and rides it out of Las Vegas. The film's mix of romance with Jane Fonda as a journalist, critique of commercialization, and affection for horses and rodeo culture became a template for later rural dramas, including Redford's own The Horse Whisperer in 1998, which he directed and starred in as a Montana horse trainer. In 1980, Redford became the first actor to win an Oscar for Best Director. The film was Ordinary People, his first as a director. It was a powerful story of a dysfunctional family with Mary Tyler Moore cast way against type as a bitter, icy mother and wife. Timothy Hutton, as her son, won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. It was a surprise hit and solidified Redford as a director of empathy and power. In 1981, Redford created the Sundance Institute at his Utah property to nurture independent filmmakers, gradually transforming it into the Sundance Film Festival in Park City. By the 2020s, though, the event had essentially outgrown Park City, choosing Boulder, Colorado as the new location with a 10-year deal beginning in 2027. Behind the camera as a producer, Redford spent more than 3 decades trying to bring Tony Hillerman's Navajo detective novels to the screen in a respectful, ongoing way. He first executive produced The Dark Wind in 1991 with Lou Diamond Phillips as Officer Jim Che and Fred Ward as Lieutenant Joe Leaphorn. The film was barely released. Undeterred, he turned to television. For PBS's Mystery, he executive produced Skinwalkers in 2002, written by his son James Redford and directed by Chris Iyer, with an all-native principal cast led by Adam Beach as Che and Wes Studi as Leaphorn. Filmed on the Navajo Nation, it became PBS's highest-rated program of 2002 and spawned 2 follow-ups, Coyote Waits and A Thief of Time, again starring Beach and Studi. But no series resulted. AMC's Dark Winds finally cracked the formula. Dark Winds, launched in 2022 with Zahn McClarnon as Joe Leaphorn and Kiowa Gordon as Jim Che, leans into long-form storytelling, a mostly native cast, and a native creative team. Redford and George R.R. Martin served as executive producers. In a fitting coda, Redford's final on-screen appearance, a brief wry cameo as a chess-playing inmate opposite Martin, came in a 2025 episode of Dark Wind, 6 months before his death. Redford's affinity for Western stories was inseparable from his environmentalism. After moving permanently to Utah in the early 1960s, his guiding principle there was to develop a little and preserve a lot. He raised his voice to support climate change awareness and other environmental causes. He left his mark not only on his film work and his actions, but on his heroic activism, too. On September 16, 2025, Robert Redford, surrounded by family, died peacefully in his sleep at his home in Sundance, Utah, at the age of 89. The cause of death was not publicly disclosed. Pippa Scott's name may not be the one people mention when they talk about classic westerns, but that auburn-haired girl in The Searchers left a mark that stayed with audiences and with her for the rest of her life. Born Philippa Scott in Los Angeles on November 10, 1934, she grew up in a thoroughly show-business household. Her mother, a stage actress, her father, a successful screenwriter. She studied at UCLA and Radcliffe and then went to London to train at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts. Back in New York, she made a splash on Broadway in Child of Fortune in 1956, winning a Theatre World Award. Ford's longtime assistant saw Scott on stage playing a teenage girl and urged the director to look at her for Lucy Edwards, the sweet frontier niece of John Wayne's driven, haunted Ethan. Scott was still in college when she was brought into Ford's office at Warner Brothers, and she was cast almost instantly. Location filming in Monument Valley plunged her straight into Ford's world, the women in a motel on the bluff, the men tenting below on the red dust ground. She remembers Ford, whose reputation for being cruel to performers was darling to her, tender, careful, even protective. He directed with psychological precision. Scott later realized that the terrified scream he pushed her to give wasn't just fear of death. He wanted the audience to feel that Lucy understood she faced rape and brutal murder. Over the years, she saw The Searchers grow from a solid John Wayne Western into a highly regarded American classic. She took part in the 1990s documentary A Turning of the Earth, John Ford, John Wayne, and The Searchers, reflecting on its beauty, its uneasy politics, and Ford's treatment of Native American characters. While The Searchers is her most famous Western, Pippa Scott spent much of the late 50s and early 60s working in many of the popular TV Westerns. On Maverick, she's a spirited, quick-witted young woman caught up in a con game plot, matching Bart's charm with a dry humor of her own. She appeared in 3 episodes of Outlaws starring Don Collier, including a 2-part episode Starfall with future Starfleet Commander William Shatner. She's chained to Billy the Kid in the Girl from Paradise episode of The Tall Man. She guest starred on Have Gun Will Travel, Stagecoach West, Lancer, and The Cowboys. Perhaps the plot parallels to The Searchers' kidnapping of Lucy played a part in her casting as Mary in a Gunsmoke episode entitled Indian Ford. She plays a frontier woman taken in an Indian raid. During a year of captivity, she falls in love with a native brave. The storyline allows Pippa to show both trauma and genuine affection for her captor. Unusual for a 1961 network Western, it's one of her best parts. For many TV Western fans, Pippa Scott is forever Molly Wood, the school teacher turned editor in the first season of The Virginian. Beginning in 1962, she appears in a cluster of early episodes as the publisher, editor, and chief reporter of the Medicine Bow Banner, giving the long-form Western a literate, progressive female presence in town. In The Brazen Bell and It Tolls for Thee, Molly functions as both love interest and conscience, a woman who believes in schools, newspapers, and civilized debate in a still violent West. Scott was much more than a Western player. In the late 1950s, she was Pegan in Auntie Mame, Rosalind Russell's warm, sensible future daughter-in-law, engaged to Roger Smith. She turns up in 2 films with Dick Van Dyke. In Some Kind of Nut with Van Dyke in 1969, she had a small part, but in Norman Lear's 1971 Cold Turkey, she's Van Dyke's long-suffering wife. During the 1970s, Pippa appeared in most of TV's dramatic programs, shows like Remington Steele, The Streets of San Francisco, Kolchak, Mannix, Ironside, Cannon, Columbo, and Barnaby Jones. In 1964, she married producer Lee Rich, who would go on to co-found Lorimar Productions, the company behind The Waltons, Dallas, and Knots Landing. They had 2 children. The marriage ended in divorce in 1983, but they stayed close until his death in 2012. By the 1990s, Scott had largely stepped away from Hollywood acting and reinvented herself as a human rights activist and documentarian. She worked for Linden Productions and developed documentaries about conflict and justice. Her humanitarian work, particularly on Bosnia and Rwanda, became her late-life passion. Pippa Scott died of heart failure at her home in Santa Monica, California, on May 22, 2025, at the age of 90. Jan Shepard was one of those quietly indispensable actresses you see everywhere, but rarely hear or read about. Born Josephine Angela Sorbello on March 19, 1928 in Quakerton, Pennsylvania, she was valedictorian, cheerleader, drum majorette, and a regular in school plays. After high school, she headed west to visit relatives in California and never looked back. In Los Angeles, she joined the Ben Bard Players and honed her craft at the Pasadena Playhouse. By 1952, she was on television in Fireside Theater, and 2 years later, she rode into her first TV Western on Death Valley Days in the 1954 episode Yeller, playing Ellie opposite a young Dirk London, the screen name of actor Ray Boyle. Shepard and Boyle had already met in 1951 in the Los Angeles acting community. They married in 1954 and stayed together nearly 70 years until his death in 2022 at the age of 98. As a brunette, her original hair color, Jan worked on early TV anthology shows like Public Defender with rising star Charles Bronson and the Schlitz Playhouse of the Stars, shown here with Darryl Hickman in Showdown at Sunset. Jan told me that once she changed her hair color from brunette to blonde, she never stopped working. Starting with Death Valley Days and continuing through the heyday of the genre, she appeared in over 30 TV westerns. Her western credits read like a roll call of the era. The Adventures of Kit Carson, 2 episodes. The Lone Ranger, The Life and Legend of Wyatt Earp, Sergeant Preston of the Yukon. Circus Boy, The Gray Ghost, The Californians, Trackdown, The Adventures of Ren 1010, Wichita Town with Joel McRae, Wanted Dead or Alive, U.S. Marshal. 3 episodes of Rawhide, Bat Masterson, Gunslinger, Stagecoach West, Lawman. 3 episodes of Laramie with John Smith and Robert Fuller. Bonanza, A Man Called Shenandoah, The Road West, and 5 episodes of The Virginian with her friend James Drury. She also turned up in 2 episodes of another favorite, The High Chaparral. In Our Lady of Guadalupe, she enjoyed working with fellow guest star Ricardo Montalban and especially the regulars, the family feel of the cast and crew, camaraderie that made her feel welcome and part of the team. She wasn't there just as window dressing either. She could handle a gun and really delivered, which is why she was in such demand. Jan made 2 films with Elvis Presley. In King Creole, directed by Michael Curtiz, she played his sister. At a studio doctor's office, she and Elvis showed up in almost matching clothes, and he jokingly told her one of them would have to give up either the jacket or the pants. On the film, they quickly developed a warm, almost sibling relationship. Presley told her that if he ever had a sister, he wished it would be her, and at her birthday party, he showed up and surprised her with an 8mm movie camera to film the party. 8 years later, in Paradise Hawaiian Style, she played the wife of James Shigeta, partner in the helicopter tour business with Elvis. She noticed how much more jaded he'd become by then. She said they never dated. She was already married to Boyle and treated Elvis like family. Jan also worked for producer Roger Corman in the cult movie Attack of the Giant Leeches. Jan made 4 appearances on Gunsmoke. Her first was The Tall Trapper, a 30-minute episode with Strother Martin as her husband, who kills her. In another black and white half-hour, Old Faces, she was the wife of James Drury, a close friend already. They had starred together in Third of a Man, a small movie about mental illness, in 1962. In the Gunsmoke color episode Noose of Gold, she's the wife of Steve Inat, a hunted fugitive in a plot of a corrupt politician who wants to kill Inat. It was Jan's favorite. She enjoyed the acting dance with Steve Inat, an actor and director who died too young. Before Jan's marriage, Amanda Blake was Jan's longtime roommate. It was prior to Amanda being cast as Miss Kitty on Gunsmoke. Jan recalled several wild and very funny stories of the feisty redhead when she joined me to share some Hollywood stories for one of her several appearances on A Word on Westerns. Jan's husband, Ray Boyle, who would become best known as Morgan Earp on The Life and Legend of Wyatt Earp, joined me for an interview too. From the mid-1950s through the late 60s, Shepard became one of television's go-to actresses, with multiple appearances on Perry Mason and other popular series like The FBI, Land of the Giants, Marcus Welby, Ironside, and Then Came Bronson. Jan's last on-screen credit was an episode of The Rookies in 1973. The movie project she singled out as a favorite was, of course, King Creole, both because she thought it was Elvis's best picture and because of the quality of the production and director Michael Curtiz. Jan and Ray were a terrific couple, their long marriage a genuine love story. They had one son, Brandon, who worked in Hollywood as a successful prop master. Jan Shepard passed away peacefully from respiratory failure Friday, January the 17th, 2025, at Providence St. Joseph Medical Center in Burbank. She passed 8 weeks shy of turning 97. Samuel M. Sherman was born on April 23, 1940, in New York City and grew up a movie-obsessed kid in the Bronx, devouring horror films, serials, and B-westerns in neighborhood theaters and on television. He got to meet many of his heroes in a life wallowing in genre movies. Sherman's lifelong love of B-westerns first surfaced professionally at James Warren's publishing empire. Hired in 1958 as a writer and advertising specialist on Warren's money-making magazine Famous Monsters of Filmland, Sherman soon became one of Warren's key genre specialists. With Sam, Warren launched Favorite Westerns of Filmland and quickly retitled it Wildest Westerns in 1960 as a cowboy movie counterpart to Famous Monsters. Sherman took over as editor with issue number 2 and steered the magazine through its 6-issue run, filling it with interviews, set visits, and articles on B-Western cowboys, serial stars, and stuntmen. He then edited Warren's Screen Thrills Illustrated, an action and adventure magazine, heavy on serials, war films, and, of course, westerns. These magazines were real eye-openers for those of us young TV cowboys who devoured the contents and committed the never-before-available facts to memory. They basically changed our life paths. These Warren years cemented Sherman's reputation as a historian of serials and B-westerns. Researching Western material put him onto the lost and underseen work of silent and early talkie-era Poverty Row cowboy star and producer-director Victor Adamson, sometimes acting in silence as Art Mix, but better known under another alias, Denver Dixon. Tracking down Adamson in California in 1962, Sherman met both the elder Western veteran and his son, budding low-budget director Al Adamson. Victor asked Sherman to help place 2 ultra-cheap features his son had made, Halfway to Hell in 1960 and 2 Tickets to Terror, 1962. The films didn't make much money, but they did forge a friendship and business alliance between Sam and Al, and a key partnership was formed that would last until Adamson's murder in 1995 and become the spine of Sherman's later memoir, When Dracula Met Frankenstein. In 1968-69, Sherman and Adamson finalized their collaboration as Independent International Pictures, which specialized in drive-in and grindhouse fare, horror, biker pictures, softcore sex comedies, kung fu, and blaxploitation, always sold with lurid posters and can't-miss titles that often changed multiple times for further re-releases. Satan's Sadist, the violent biker picture that essentially launched the company, starred Russ Tamblyn, Scott Brady, and Robert Dix, the son of actor Richard Dix. When I interviewed Russ for A Word on Westerns, he really didn't have much to say about that experience. Blazing Stewardesses in 1975 was a sex farce about airline hostesses at a dude ranch and was deliberately cast as a tribute to 1940s B-westerns, headlined by Yvonne DiCarlo, Republic star and TV veteran Don Red Barry, Sam's B-western hero Bob Livingston of the Three Musketeers in the 1939 Lone Ranger serial, all alongside the Ritz brothers. Across the independent international slate, Sherman and Adamson repeatedly hired aging cowboys and serial players, John Carradine, Lon Chaney Jr., Kent Taylor, Lawrence Tierney, and others. These pictures thrived in a very specific marketplace. In the late 1960s and 1970s, hundreds of drive-in theaters and urban grindhouses needed a constant flow of new product. The independent international films were incredibly cheap and technically inept in almost every way imaginable. But for drive-ins and grindhouses, they were inexpensive to rent and easy to sell, with a poster and a wild title. Sherman understood that audience, teenagers on dates, blue-collar night crowds, and genre fans who cared less about polish than about action, nudity, shock value, and of course their companions in a car at the drive-in. Privately, Sherman never stopped being a fan and a collector. He amassed libraries of 16mm prints, movie memorabilia, and technical gear. We called him a walking encyclopedia, always loyal to the veteran performers he admired, generous with his time and stories. Twice, Sam helped me book appearances to plug films I had produced on The Joe Franklin Show, hosted by his friend and the man credited with creating the talk show genre, Joe hosting it uninterrupted from 1951 until 1993, most of those years on WOR-TV out of New York. Visiting Joe Franklin's cluttered office in New York City was a treat, but actually being on his show was a fanboy's thrill. Sherman made his home for decades in New Jersey, the birthplace of the drive-in theater. He was married to Linda Sherman, who predeceased him by about 3 years, and they had a daughter, Stephanie. Samuel M. Sherman died at his home in Freehold, New Jersey on September 29, 2025, at the age of 85. Television writer, producer, and novelist Michael Sloan was born Michael Fred Sloan on October 14, 1946, in Manhattan, into a deeply theatrical family. His parents were Broadway producers Paula Stone and Michael Sloan. Westerns were in the family DNA. His mother had been the first leading lady in the Hopalong Cassidy films, debuting opposite William Boyd in 1935's Hop Along Cassidy. Michael Sloan's early career mixed low-budget features and television. While living in England, he wrote and produced 3 films, among them Hunted, starring Edward Woodward. His key break in American television came when Universal bought a Columbo script from him, famously the only freelance script the series ever shot, which led directly to staff work in Hollywood. At Universal, he became a go-to writer-producer for Glenn Larson on series like McCloud, Quincy M.E., and Battlestar Galactica, earning a Primetime Emmy nomination as part of the producing team on Quincy in 1978. Though best known for co-creating the crime drama The Equalizer, starring, yes, the same Edward Woodward from his first film, Sloan's work kept circling Western territory. He created and ran the martial arts adventure Kung Fu: The Legend Continues, a modern-day sequel to the 1970s Western set Kung Fu, produced in Canada. The new series reunited David Carradine with the Kane mythology, paired him with Chris Potter as his police detective son, and ran in first-run syndication for 4 seasons. It was narrated by Richard Anderson, a friend from Sloan's days at Universal. Sloan clearly enjoyed tipping his hat to the classic TV cowboys. On Kung Fu: The Legend Continues, he oversaw a Season 3 episode entitled Gunfighters, a time-bending story in which a wounded original series Kwai Chang Caine in 1905 Wyoming calls on his modern-day grandson to help restore order to a violent frontier town. Sloan stacked the guest cast with Western TV legends James Drury, Robert Fuller, Clu Gulager, and because it was a Warner Brothers series, Clint Walker, who was able to reprise his Cheyenne Bodie character. He later pushed further into frontier territory by writing and producing Call of the Wild, a Jack London-inspired series shot in Canada for Animal Planet about a boy and his dog in the Yukon. In 2003, Sloan created Mystery Woman, a series of 2-hour movies starring Kelly Martin as an amateur detective who inherits a mystery bookstore. One of the 11 movies harkened back to Sloan's heritage and love of the Western genre. It's called Mystery Woman, Wild West Mystery, and featured friend and perfect cowboy hero Bruce Boxleitner as a former TV Western star. Co-stars included Charles Deerkop, Wings Hauser, Barbara Niven, and Barry Livingston. Sloan's towering credit is The Equalizer. In the mid-1980s, he co-created and produced the original series starring Edward Woodward as ex-intelligence operative Robert McCall, running 4 seasons on CBS from 1985 to 1989. Decades later, he helped shepherd the property into a new era, Columbia Sony relaunched The Equalizer as a 3-film franchise starring Denzel Washington, with Sloan credited as producer on all 3 movies. CBS followed with a fresh TV reboot in 2021, headlined by Queen Latifah. Sloan also chronicled his own career in the memoir, One More Thing, Sir. In 1990, he married former Little House on the Prairie actress Melissa Sue Anderson, whom he'd met when she guested on his revival of Alfred Hitchcock Presents. The couple had 2 children, moved to Montreal in 2002, and became naturalized Canadian citizens on Canada Day in 2007. In later years, Sloan continued to write and produce for television, especially in Canada, and never missed an opportunity to join my posse of Algonquin cowboys for lunch with friends and co-workers. We were always glad to get together and share our love of Westerns. Michael Sloan died peacefully in New York City on August 13, 2025, at the age of 78. Actor stuntman Neil Summers was born in a suburb of London, England on April 28, 1944. For someone whose passion was movie and TV cowboys and would end up in several classic westerns, his life was a dream come true. Neil spent much of his boyhood in South Africa before his family immigrated to the United States in 1958. They settled in Phoenix, Arizona, where the slight, cowboy-obsessed teenager haunted local theaters running anything that looked like a Western. After finishing high school in Phoenix in 1963, he heard about a movie with John Wayne being shot in the Tucson area, and he hitchhiked there and talked his way onto the John Wayne picture, McClintock, as a stunt extra, effectively beginning a 6-decade career falling off horses, getting punched, and being shot for a living. From the start, he was primarily a stuntman who could step in front of the camera for a small speaking role. Summers always said his real education came from the old hands. One of the most important was ace Western stuntman Henry Wills, a mentor whom Neil credited with teaching him how to ride for the camera, take a bullet, and stay humble on set. Summers joined the Stuntmen's Association of Motion Pictures and remained a lifetime member. When he died, the group announced the loss of a lifetime member who had been with them for decades. In time, he became one of the go-to Western stunt doubles in Hollywood for performers like Warren Oates, Roddy McDowell, Michael Anderson Jr., and Michael J. Pollard. Neil's film and television resume is practically a roll call of classic Westerns. He did stunts or bits on Bonanza, Gunsmoke, Death Valley Days, The High Chaparral, Daniel Boone, Cimarron Strip, and many, many more. He was one of the Arizona locals who worked on Howard Hawks' Rio Lobo in 1970, where he not only did stunt work, but he also had a quick line, "What the hell?" as a guard at the ranch of villain Victor French. That job marked the beginning of a long friendship with French, who was both an actor, director, and movie memorabilia collector. The 2 men crossed paths repeatedly, including at least one Gunsmoke episode, Matt's Love Story, in 1973. That's where Victor French played the guest heavy and Summers appeared in the supporting cast. Summers' career took an important turn when Sergio Leone spotted him in The Life and Times of Judge Roy Bean and brought him into the Italian-American Western My Name is Nobody in 1973. Pairing him with Henry Fonda and a young Terence Hill. Neil and Hill hit it off. Westerns All Italiana later noted that Summers quickly became one of Hill's regulars, appearing in his films and series, including a 1991 feature, Lucky Luke, based on the comic book Western that served as a pilot to a run of TV movies with Summers playing Hill's sidekick, Deputy Virgil. Though best known as a stuntman in Westerns, Summers steadily accumulated bit parts and character roles in non-Western films as well, including Warren Beatty's colorful comic take on sleuth Dick Tracy. Even with all of the outlandish makeup, Neil was recognizable as the rat-faced henchman, Rodin. Away from the set, Summers was a serious Western historian and collector. He amassed an enormous collection of Western film memorabilia. His books include First Official TV Western Book and 2 volumes of Candid Cowboys, packed with photos of Western stars, and with Roger Crowley, a wonderful photo book entitled The Official TV Western Roundup Book. In his later decades, Summers became a regular figure at Kanab, Utah's Western Legends Roundup, where he eventually moved. Beyond Victor French and Terrence Hill, he counted fellow stuntmen like Dean Smith, Lauren Janes, and actors such as Don Collier and other High Chaparral alumni among his close friends. As a stuntman, bit player, historian, and festival presence, he helped bridge the golden age of studio westerns and the nostalgia era that followed, making sure the men and women who hit the ground weren't forgotten. Summers' health declined in his final years. Friends knew that he had been battling cancer for some time. He continued to make appearances as energy allowed and remained active in writing. He died in Kanab, Utah on September 4, 2025, at the age of 81. Born Harris Bart Goldberg in Los Angeles on November 5, 1937, and abandoned at an orphanage as an infant, at 4 months, Harris Yulin was adopted and raised in a Jewish household in L.A. After a stint in the U.S. Army, he drifted through Europe and returned to Los Angeles studying with famed blacklisted actor-teacher Jeff Corey. He made his off-Broadway debut in 1963 in James Sanders' Next Time I'll Sing to You, alongside James Earl Jones and Estelle Parsons. His screen debut was in a little-seen film, End of the Road, in 1970. It was an important film for Yulin because he became close friends with its star, Stacy Keach, a friendship that led to his breakthrough role in his second feature film, the Western Doc, in 1971. Stacy Keach starred as Doc Holliday with Faye Dunaway as Big Nose Kate Elder, Yulin playing Wyatt Earp. It was shot in Almeria, Spain. The film was gritty, a revisionist take on Tombstone. Yulin later recalled that it was hell to make, citing constant disagreements, costume arguments over wardrobe, and nights spent with Keach rewriting next day's scenes because he and Yulin felt director Frank Perry didn't really know how to make a Western. Filming fell apart so badly that a campfire scene originally meant to be shot in Madrid was later reshot in New York's Central Park. On release, Doc was a commercial failure. Critics complained that the picture was grimy, talky, and dull. Its revisionist attitude, presenting Wyatt as an ambitious, often unlikable political operator, and Doc as a damaged, near-psychotic drifter, alienated viewers at the time. For Western fans, Yulin's signature big-screen work remained Doc, but he returned to the genre intermittently, each role giving him a rich vein of questionable characters. He appeared in a Little House on the Prairie episode Child of Pain as an alcoholic frontier father. Harris then landed as a recurring villain on ABC's epic series How the West Was Won, who bedevils the McCahan family. The next year, he portrayed Jesse James in The Last Ride of the Dalton Gang, director Dan Curtis's Western of famous outlaws portrayed by a collection of familiar character actors. Yulin returned to the range again in the 2000 TV movie The Virginian, playing Judge Henry opposite Bill Pullman as the Virginian, with Diane Lane, John Savage, and Dennis Weaver. The next year, Yulin resurfaced on the range in American Outlaws, a highly fictional Jesse James romp filmed in Canada where, this time, he played a ruthless railroad president trying to crush the James Younger gang. If Doc 30 years prior was a revisionist Western, American Outlaws was a pop Western that Yulin anchored as a clever, morally compromised man in a position of power. Away from cowboy country, Harris became best known for complex authority figures, judges, detectives, bureaucrats, crime bosses who were actually either corrupt, compromised, or simply exhausted by the world. Roles such as a crooked cop in Scarface with Al Pacino, the explosive Judge Wexler in Ghostbusters 2, and a veteran detective in Training Day. On television, he appeared on Law & Order: Criminal Intent, The X-Files, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Nikita, and scored an Emmy nomination for his menacing guest turn as a mobster in A Word to the Wise episode on Frasier in 1996. A new generation discovered him as the ailing but warm-hearted neighbor on Ozark. Throughout the years, Yulin continued to appear on stage and taught acting, passing on some of Jeff Corey's tough, practical wisdom to younger actors. Yulin was romantically linked with Faye Dunaway in the early 1970s, and then he married actress Gwen Wells, remaining with her until her death in 1993. Later, he married actress Kristen Lohman. Harris Yulin was one of those faces you instantly recognize even if you can't always place the name, quietly stealing scenes for more than 60 years. In June 2025, shortly before he was due to start shooting a new comedy series for MGM+, Yulin died of cardiac arrest June 10th in New York City at the age of 87.
And you'll be home at last. Look down that lonesome road. Hang down your head and cry. The best of friends must part sometime. Oh, tell